I'm Baratunde Thurston, and this is Clarify, the show helping you make an informed decision on the way to the polls and hopefully providing a good soundtrack for the ride. Today, we're sitting down with Chicago rapper Vic Mensa to talk about policing in America. Police killings of black people have left many outraged over what appears to be a pattern of racial discrimination. It's a complicated issue, and it's important to understand the facts and the human consequences. Let's look at some numbers. For black Americans, police use force at a rate 3.6 times higher than for white Americans, and 2.5 times higher than for Americans overall. But black people aren't 2.5 times more likely to commit more crimes. Instead, some say cops just aren't as committed to stopping the same crimes in white neighborhoods.
We are not targeting communities of color. We are targeting behavior.
They're targeting behavior with controversial tactics some say are discriminatory. Tactics like stop and frisk and broken windows policing. That's the theory that says pursuing low-level crimes prevents more serious ones. But while the police are targeting this behavior, who's tracking police behavior? We'll talk to an NYPD officer about his experience on the force. But first, Vic Mensa told me about his childhood in Chicago and his relationship with the police. Vic Mensa, it's a pleasure to meet you.
My pleasure, man.
Thank you for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to me a bit about your upbringing in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, I'm from the south side of Chicago, neighborhood called Hyde Park, so.
Oh, you're Obama's neighbor.
Yeah, like 6 blocks from Obama, you know, and equal distance from project housing and Section 8 housing, across the street, really. And so I was kind of in between two worlds in a lot of ways. Also, my mother is from upstate New York and my father's from West Africa. So racially, I was in between two worlds, and geographically in Chicago, I was as well. There's kids on bikes, 12 years old, selling crack to fiends, and I'm going to a magnet school. So, you know, it's kind of it's a lot of things going on at once in my childhood.
Did it feel like two distinct worlds when you were in it?
Yes, it did. Growing up, I didn't feel so racial when I was a kid. I kind of used to want to be just one or the other. I used to want to be fully black or fully what. I was like, this shit is confusing. It doesn't make sense. Like, I can't dance all that good.
Like Obama.
But then I get kicked out of the sleepover as the only black kid. So, yeah, it was around the time that I was like 12, 13 years old that I think I really began to feel black because I started to get treated different. And police would see me outside of my school, and if I had my hands in my hoodie, call me over to the car. I got my hands in my hoodie. He's like, take your hands out your hoodie before I punch you in the fucking face. I'm like,
that's how they said hello. That was hello in Chicago police speak.
Chicago police to a 12-year-old.
What was your first reaction to the severe shooting of Laquan Mcdonald?
I was sickened, you know, just to see him empty that clip in that child as he lay motionless. And I immediately took to the streets. I would never want to make the passing of a person into like an opportunity, but Laquan's murder really, really gave us something to stand for. There wasn't a lot that you could say. You know, the picture told 1,000 words, and this was really a chance for the world to see what we see and for us to let our voices be heard.
How do you absorb the cumulative effect of not just in Chicago, but the Alton Sterlings and the Philando Castiles and the Renisha McBrides? Yeah. How does that hit you, and how does that hit your art?
I try to make music, or not try, I do make music from the heart, just from a real place, because that's what matters to me.
Yeah.
But in my real life, though, it's hard to cope with. But then I was kind of losing my mind for a second after I saw that second video, the Philando video of him just a corpse in that car. I had a moment where I just broke down in the hotel room, just like hysterically kind of crying, because I felt all of the hatred towards black people upon myself. Like I just felt like I felt like I was holding all of that weight.
I was listening to and then reading Shades of Blue, one of your tracks, and you draw this line between Flint and police and the lack of accountability. Can you talk more about what made you link those in the way that you did? Because to an outside, superficial observer, they would say they don't have anything to do with each other.
Right. So I ask a question in the last line of the first verse where I say, and everybody broke, so we in the same boat. But would they let that bitch sink if we was white? It got me shades of blue. Because I was, it's kind of like a question I think I probably know the answer to, in that there's a socioeconomic aspect to oppression by far, but you can't remove the racial aspect from it. This country was built upon the backs of slaves, and we can never act as if that's not affecting the present day. Children have died, and you've made a grave mistake that I don't even know if it's all that much of a mistake, They don't care about our lives. Poor people's lives, and specifically black people's lives. So that's how accountability ties in with the police officers, because they show over and over again that they don't care about our lives.
How do you maintain a sense of, I won't even call it optimism, but momentum to just live? How do you keep moving?
I'm inspired by extremely strong people. Like the people that I look to as my mentors are like Malcolm X and Huey Newton and these books that I read over and over as a kid. I have to be charged by struggle and being somebody that cares, and I want to see improvements and I want to see changes and I want to help make those changes happen. I'm honestly motivated by this struggle. And I wake up and I'm reading about this shit. I go to sleep, I'm writing about this shit. I go through my day arguing about this shit. So, yeah, it's like, this is what keeps me going right now.
When asked whether police in Chicago treat all citizens fairly, 70% of Chicagoans said no. They're not alone. Confidence in U.S. policing tactics is the lowest it's been in over 20 years. But let's look at some numbers. In 2014, 1 person was killed by the police in the UK, 7 people were killed in Germany, and killedbypolice.net, yes, that's a real website, found that the number for the US was 1,100. And then there's this. In 2015, police killed 25 people in Canada. That same year, police killed 72 people in California alone. We like to say we're number 1, but American exceptionalism isn't always a good thing. Of the 1,000 people killed by police every year in the US, 49% are white and 24% are black. Yet white people make up 77% of the population, while black people only make up 13%. Something doesn't add up. Tactics like broken windows and stop and frisk policing have been shown to disproportionately target black and Latino communities. In 2011, there were 685,000 stop and frisk stops in New York City. 85% involved black and Latino people. Not only is that disproportionate, some say it's unconstitutional. And when I say some, I'm not just talking about the people in these communities. I'm talking about a federal judge who rejected this policy, and I'm talking about NYPD officers themselves. A group of 12 minority officers is suing the NYPD for violating a state ban on numbers-based policing. That's when police are required to make a certain number of arrests to reach their quota. Even though NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton says he will step down and deny these allegations,
Bullshit is my response to that. Quite clearly.
He'll leave behind a problem much bigger than himself and much deeper than the police he's commissioned. America's implicit racial bias, something even a body cam can't capture. So where do the presidential candidates stand? Hillary Clinton has put forth a series of policy positions. One involves spending $1 billion to fund police training programs to tackle any implicit bias. And she plans to make body cameras available in every police department. Donald Trump's positions have been harder to pin down. He has expressed, however, some support for body camera programs at local police departments. But instead of laying out more comprehensive policy statements, he's focused instead on expressing full support for law enforcement. One thing is for sure. Recent news coverage of and attention to high-profile shootings means policing will remain a topic of national conversation for the foreseeable future. Welcome back. We're now at our panel portion of the show, and we are joined by 3 additional people. We have Darnell Moore, senior correspondent at Mike. We have Edwin Raymond, a New York City police officer who is currently involved in a class action lawsuit against the NYPD. We're going to get into that. And of course, recording artist Vic Mensa. And I'm Baratunde Thurston. Welcome to the tables, men.
Peace. Thank you.
So I just want to point out, We're here to talk about policing. We have 4 black men talking about policing, including 1 police officer. So I really appreciate you being here with us.
Absolutely.
And, I want to start with a group kind of tag in on first experiences with police. What do you remember as your first run-ins with that version of the law?
I was 17, and I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, walking home, sunlight. It was 3 p.m., like around 3:30 p.m. After school. And a black police officer mistook me for what they call a lookout boy. So these are people that would holler like po-po when the cops would come and to inform the drug dealers that they were coming. Anyway, he didn't read me my Miranda rights. He twisted my arm behind my back, threw me against a brick wall, put me in a car, and drove off. At the time, I was a student in a program called Institute for Political and Legal Education, so I knew.
But he didn't know you were part of that institute. Oops.
So I knew when he did not read me my Miranda rights that this would be a case that could be not pursued. And this was a black police officer that did this in a black community. So, and I had watched my friends and my family members experience similar things, and that shaped my perception of law enforcement in my neighborhood ever since.
Edwin?
All right, I think I was about maybe 15 or 16. And in New York, born and raised, grew up in Brooklyn, still live in Brooklyn. In New York, it was called Operation Impact, where rookie officers would basically hit the ground running, and they would have to write as many summonses, get as many stop and frisk, and arrest as many people as possible. So at 15, I just kept getting stopped. And it was just 90% of the stops were unprofessional. You know, they kind of sized us up and thought they knew everything about us because of where we lived and how we looked. And this actually was part of the reason why I decided to join the police force. I decided, I need to join this thing and see what I can do from the inside.
How about you, Vic?
My first experience with police was like 6th grade when I was like 11. I was tagging a trash can in an alley behind my school, and one of the teachers saw me. I was getting in trouble. I thought I'd, probably get detention or something. And then they had this police officer come in and like write me a police report. And
like a formal actual
yeah, like
police
a formal
report,
police report, like before I got suspended. But I just remember being a small kid and seeing how they tell us that we're criminals from a young age,
Maya, I'm gonna break the pattern a little bit. My first experience with police, I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the Columbia Heights neighborhood in the 80s, which was going through everything that all of our cities have gone through. And there was a domestic violence dispute next door. And there was a beat cop named Officer Bonnie. And Officer Bonnie was just like, she was bad, man. She was like a badass officer. And I remember looking out my front window and seeing her with 2 chrome guns pointed at someone like, come out with your hands up, motherfucker. There would be later in different images, and I would have horror stories from friends, much more than my own experience. But my first story was a really, really tough lady with 2 guns drawn trying to help the family next door out. Yeah. Edwin, I want to come back to your story because you talked about your experience leading you to join the force. Now you are still employed by the New York Police Department while
Yes, sir.
also engaged in a lawsuit against the police department. But please tell us what's going on. I don't know that many people employed by people they're also suing.
Yeah. So in the police academy, I was looking for what was wrong. I was looking at the fine print to where it says to racially profile, and everything that we were experiencing in our neighborhoods. I was looking for where it's written to see where I can try to erase it.
You thought it'd be that simple?
Yeah, and
oh, you just got to edit the document.
quickly erase that. And I learned shockingly that the academy is actually really good training. If the training was being properly applied, we wouldn't have this issue in the United States. The thing is, and I said this before, white communities get that stuff, that everything in the manual, they get that policing. We get something completely different. We get a backdoor, unwritten, de facto policy. So, but I still didn't know what it was until my first day on patrol. Your objective is to get us arrested and summonses and stop and frisk. That's it. Nothing about community interaction, nothing about all of the hats that a police officer is supposed to wear, none of it. Just arrest, summonses, and stop and frisk. So on day 1, I figured, okay, they just want us to know how to do these things, but then day 2 is the same thing. Day 3, day 4. That's when I realized, wow, this was it the whole time. this was what was going on when I was 15. These officers were just trying to meet their quota. So yeah, you have the racist, the bigoted officer, the bigoted individual who becomes an officer. You have that as an issue, but one discussion that's never enough is the systemic, the systemic issues in policing, the stuff that's deeply embedded.
But the enforcement is not distributed evenly. So in terms of that level of accountability, it's like, yo, why aren't we like raiding frat houses in the same way that we're raiding the projects? So let's get to the other side of this injustice, which is restoring some form of justice. Darnell, what are you finding in your reporting, in your activism, in the communities of people trying to make this not be the case? What's on the table as far as like how to bring more accountability to this behavior, or how to solve this problem?
The first thing I think, we have only thought about safety as a thing that one can achieve through policing. What does it mean to keep our community safe, our people safe, without having to overly rely on a law enforcement structure that is systemically problematic in the first place? So that policing is used to try to attempt to manage a range of things that law enforcement cannot fix. Issues like homelessness, issues like economic disenfranchisement that leads to alternative economies like drug sales, can't be resolved by policing. So one of the areas that the organizers are focusing on in New York is pushing the government to defund or to decrease funding in policing and invest money in other areas like educational initiatives, like mental health responses. The other thing, though, is these other issues you bring about. I mean, we haven't even talked about police unions in a way that police unions, benevolence associations shore up officers and protect officers. But beyond individual officers, there's a culture here, right? There's a culture that says, like, once you're in this brotherhood, in this society, you can't speak up when folk are doing bad shit.
What was going through your head when you heard him describing his experience of just like, this is how you police, right? Day 1, do this. Day 4, do the same thing. The incentive structure. How did that reflect against your own experience that you and I were talking about?
I mean, it makes perfect sense, but what I thought was interesting about what you were just saying was how careful they seem to be, like, with their verbiage, and keeping things unspoken but understood. I think that it's necessary and also very intelligent what you did to go in and start looking for, cracks in the ceiling, because there's no way that we can solve this problem strictly from being on the outside. I think it's a major issue that the majority of policing, inner city neighborhoods don't live in those neighborhoods, and they have no contact with those neighborhoods other than when they get called to the scene of a crime. I feel as if we need elected police review organizations that are prosecuting these cops, because there's no possible way that every one of these shooters was innocent, It doesn't make sense.
So Edwin, this is something I've been dying to actually talk with a real life police officer about. We're hearing all this, demands for pensions to be taken away, allegations of murder, all this video footage, like, do you as a police officer feel besieged? Do you ever feel like the public doesn't understand? That we are too quick to judge, that we don't sympathize with how hard it is to pull the trigger or not pull the trigger? Like, where do you sit in this spectrum of sympathy for the public outrage, but also you're inside and you have been given a job to do and you're asked to patrol some tough spots?
Understood. Yeah, that's a good question, man. It's a tough job. One of the things people vicariously learn. So a lot of what people think they know about policing comes from TV. So, it's a writer's imagination. That's not policy. That's not realistic. Like, what happens when someone gets shot, for instance? Prior to becoming a police officer, I thought you fly back 6 feet. Yet in the academy, I saw videos of people getting shot that kept coming. Like, it's not what you think. When it comes to holding cops accountable, the one thing that's bigger than bad policy or inherently racist policy is implicit bias. It's real. I mean, this isn't something that's exclusive to policing. This is an American issue, this idea that the 4 of us are automatically criminals without actually committing crimes. This is what when the cops are responding to jobs and they see us, this is what they see first: a criminal. You know, so they already start at level 10.
Yeah, they're primed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and this is the thing is, again, this is something that's exacerbated when you become a police officer, but it doesn't start with policing. It starts with American culture. This is part of living in the U.S. Whether you're white or black, we're all gonna, unfortunately, have these implicit biases, but it's up to us to know that they're not based on facts. You know, they're based on American culture that's demonized us for 400 years. You know, that
was a beautiful answer, and I thank you for a lot of what I observe. And you know, we've had these moments of, occasionally in all this heat, we've had moments of crossover, moments of healing. I think you embody a lot of this tension and this challenge, like in your work. And I do want you to say what's the name of the lawsuit and how people
it's
find out.
I don't know about that.
Raymond versus the city of New York. I'm the lead plaintiff. Yeah, that's crazy,
That
right?
is so G.
That shit is gangster. That's an album
That's a
title.
movie, right? Exactly.
That's an album title for real.
Yeah.
From speaking out against the lawsuit, against the quotas, our First Amendment rights were violated. So we're definitely suing for that. 14th Amendment, you know, equal protection under the law, both for us as police officers who spoke out and for you, because if white folks aren't being, you know, arrested and summoned for the same behavior on one part of town and you do it and you're getting arrested and summoned, they're violating your 14th Amendment.
Officer Raymond.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Listen, it's for
Thank
you,
you
brother.
so much.
I'm not worried about myself. It's for
Yeah.
you. It's for everybody here.
Yeah.
You should be able to fly in from Chi-Town and not get profiled. You know, you should, your celebrity status shouldn't even have to be mentioned for you to be treated like a man. You understand? And likewise, you should be able to walk the streets, and until you do something that, you know, something serious that deserves police response, you should be able to live.
Yeah. Whether it's tagging a dumpster out back of your school or walking down the street. Thank you, Darnell. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Vic. This has
y'all.
been not enough. There's never enough time, but I appreciate this fellowship.
I come back anytime, man.
All right.
Love.
Thanks, y'all.